The day I sold my company, I thought I'd made it. 7 years of work, 47 million in revenue, 200 employees, and one clause in the contract cost me $6.5 million. That's how today's guest, Chad Nikkel, learned one of the most expensive and valuable lessons of his entrepreneurial career. Welcome back to the Mike Method, where we explore the habits, mindsets, and hard-won lessons of extraordinary leaders. My guest today is Chad Nikkel, founder and CEO of Bold Instinct and the creator of the Business Builder Group. Chad is a serial entrepreneur and business builder who has started, scaled, and sold 11 companies, 7 of them in the home services and construction space. From taking over a small roofing company in Denver and growing it to 47 million in revenue, to rolling up and exiting a pool service company in Arizona, Chad has mastered what it takes to move from technician to true business owner. In this conversation, Chad shares what he calls the return on life philosophy, why your business should exist to serve you, not the other way around, and how founders can design a company that thrives without them. We dive into the emotional roller coaster of selling your business, the hidden traps in earnouts, and the $1 million clause every entrepreneur should know about before signing a deal. Whether you're building toward an exit or just trying to fall back in love with your business, this episode will change how you think about ownership, freedom, and legacy. So grab a coffee and get ready to learn from somebody who's built and sold more than most people ever will. This is the Mike Method. Let's dive in. Chad, thanks, man, for being on the podcast. I really appreciate you making time for me today.
Mike, I'm super excited.
So I'm super curious about your space, and we're going to get into why I'm really curious about your space in a little bit. But I kind of want to, from a launching off perspective, I want to talk about your experience because you've built a number of home services businesses personally. And I'm curious, you must have learned something about what it means to be an entrepreneur and what the right way to do it and what the wrong way to do it, having done this multiple times.
Yeah, I mean, for sure the wrong way. I know I've done that. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I've built, I guess, 11 businesses that made money. A few businesses that didn't. But in my career, and out of those 11 businesses, 7 of them were home services or construction type businesses. And I was just, chatting about this earlier, but what is the thing that, I tell entrepreneurs that are starting out or trying to establish or maybe break through a growth ceiling? And that thing that I always wish I, could have done sooner, would recommend people do as soon as they can, is build that team around you that helps you get out of the weeds, right?
Okay.
That might be a leadership team. If it's early, it might be a key person. Sometimes it's that key person that is focused in an area of the business so that the entrepreneur can kind of focus on other things. But that 100% of the time has helped me grow to the next phase.
Well, I think it's interesting in this space because, the same thing's true in my space, right? Where people come in and they're doing the work and then they realize they've got too much work. So they add on some people, but they never stop doing the work. And so they're really in it day to day, but they're not thinking about it as a business. They're really, they do the work just as well as, other people do the work. So, and, in home services, you think if somebody is either a gardener or an HVAC technician or electrician or an inspector, whatever it is that they're doing, that's their craft. They have deep institutional knowledge, a deep understanding of how to do that thing really well. So it must be hard for them to step out of that role, where they're contributing and doing the thing the business is supposed to do. And effectively, they now have to grow other people to be good at that so they can work on the actual business itself.
Yeah, for sure. I think, some of that is replacing a job, right? Some people, you mentioned electrician or a landscaper, pool guy, whatever that is, it's like replacing that job. It's not a business. You've just replaced a job.
Yeah.
But what I used to tell people in the past is if you're, I've seen this all the time where sort of a small business, young entrepreneur is maybe still answering the phone while they're working, on the job site or things like that. This isn't, you're not doing your customer any favor. You're missing a call, trying to take a call and handle something while you're on a job site with another customer. And the customer that's calling you isn't getting good service. The customer that you're at isn't getting good service. And something as simple as sort of setting up an office environment to answer the calls correctly, handle those things is very simple. And very early on, people sort of miss that piece. Getting that organized in a small business is critical.
I think the challenge is, that it's an investment, right? You're hiring a person ahead of the need so that you actually create an even bigger need in your business because you now have more customers, you're doing a better job. But each time you do that, you're kind of investing ahead of the curve a little.
Yep. Yeah. That whole thing with the chicken before the egg, or what does that look like? Yeah. In business, it's the thing, right? You build for what's next, right? And it doesn't matter if you're a $5 million company or a $10 million company, there's always a next. Right? Unless it's a lifestyle business where you're just hey, this is it. But in general, my belief is all businesses sort of should be built with this idea of at some point you're going to transition it. Whether that means you're going to sell it, you're going to let the team run it, you're going to pass it on to your kids. But at some point, that business has to be built and organized so that you can transition it. There's no way that the next person coming in can transition a business if you haven't set up those pieces in place, like set that sort of operating system in the business in place.
I think it's a really good methodology because, if you think that the business is built up all about the founder, how could it actually be handed off, right? So if you have that thought process in mind when you start it, where it's like, well, I need to give away as much of my job as humanly possible, almost all of it, so that there's a point at which someone else could step in and own this business and my departure wouldn't harm the business. Because buyers in a lot of cases for these businesses are saying, well, you got to stick around for 2 years. Like there's a 2-year earnout. So then if somebody's excited to get, they're like, oh, I got 4 times EBITDA for my business. It's like, you got 2 times EBITDA for the business. No, I got 4. It's like, yeah, but you got to stick around for 2 years and make a salary. Yeah. And that EBITDA is going to the purchaser. So you really got 2 times EBITDA and then you got a job for the next 2 years. That's what you really got. And so, I think I like your methodology because it sets up from the beginning, I'm not a practitioner, I'm a business owner. And I need to then go from business owner, almost like self-employed to like business owner to, self-employed to, I guess, founder, business owner, where you're still a technician, to actual business owner where you're running the business day to day, to how would I think of this business as an investor? Yeah. Because whoever's buying it, they've got to look at the business being set up that way, or who's going to do the job that the founder's leaving behind.
For sure. One of the things that sort of happens in that stair step that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I get this all the time where founders or CEOs sort of feel lost, letting go. Right. And I want to remind CEOs or founders that your role in the business, first and foremost, is chief of culture. Right. It doesn't matter, visionary or whatever other role your role is, but CEO is chief of culture. Like, do not forget, until the company is large and has a chief people officer, the CEO is chief of culture. So as you build it around you, the founder and CEO, you really need to think about that I am chief of culture. And so those other things and those other people you put in place, you're sort of building that so that the business supports them. And by doing that, you're concentrating on that culture so that everybody's successful.
My mentor said to me early in the building of this business, he said, you're going to get to a point where the only things that you do that will matter is culture and hiring and firing, but basically building a great culture with great people. You're going to be worried about strategy and what the long-term strategy of the organization is, including the vision and the purpose and, finding new rivers of cash. And he would describe that as there's these opportunities that are tangential to the organization, that they're in your industry, but they're not what you do, but they're right beside it. So it makes sense that you would do it. And he said, and the last thing you're gonna be responsible for is doing big deals. So if you do those things really well, that's you as a founder leveraged. Everything else that you do is taking time away from doing one of those 3 things really well.
Yep. Major relationships, 100%, right? And I always think about if you're going to sell the business to an investor or to private equity or to a strategic partner, if you have a really good culture, a really good core value system built, all that operating system sort of stuff in place for the business, this thing is worth far more and it's going to be successful. You mentioned earlier in the discussion of selling a business and staying in it for a while with an earnout. Well, if the earnout's actually going to ding the bell, you've got to have these things in place before you sort of pass it off. Mm-hmm. So out of 11 businesses, I've sold 4 and 2 of those to private equity. And I made a couple of mistakes along the way. But one of the things I learned is that really establishing that culture so that it stays past me, right? Mm-hmm. So when I step aside, it's still good. So we do ding the bell. Almost all small, closely held businesses are sold with some form of earnout, right? And sellers don't like to hear that. They're like, oh, no, I want cash and walk away. But the reality is, do you really want that? Like, I don't know. How you feel the day the business is sold is great, but how you feel 2 weeks later, you sort of have this feeling of loss. So I would say if you have some attachment to the business for a while to ensure it succeeds, it's good for everyone. It's actually good for the seller and the buyer. Of course, it's puts them in a good situation as well.
And I mean, since we're on sellers, I think the other thing we can add to the equation is that, sellers, obviously, if they can get all their cash off the table at close, that would be a huge win to get 100% out, right? Then next up is like, okay, well, I'll get all my cash off the table, except I'm tied to, or not all my cash, but I'll get a percentage of the cash off the table. And then I'm tied to a 2-year earnout. So maybe I get 50 to 75% of it. And then over the next 2 years, I can get the rest of that out, but I'm going to make a salary that's the same salary I'm already taking out right now. Maybe upgraded to deal with expenses and things like that. And then the other version of it is that the private equity firm says, okay, we'll give you 50% right now, and you can or to 75%, and you can either stay in the business or you can leave the business. If you stay, we'll give you a salary, but we're locking up the other part of the sale. You're getting shares in the roll up that we're building. And so now your other 25 to 50% is in this roll up in this larger organization. And your bet is that larger thing is going to increase the EBITDA, but it's also going to increase the multiple, because that's the game the PE firms are playing, right? They want to buy you for 4, but sell you plus a bunch of others for 8 to 10. And so you're taking the ride that your 4 times equity is then the other 25 to 50% is going to be worth, maybe 1.5 to 2 times that.
Yeah.
That's your hope, right? And so that's the other thing. So really, I think when people start thinking about when do they want to sell, the first thing is like the best time to sell is when there's a buyer.
Yeah.
And then the process is going to could go through multiple buyers, and it could take multiple years. And even then you're not really out, because even if you decide not to work for the company, part of your equity may be still tied up in the business. So the decision to exit is not really a clean exit in all cases. Sometimes there's like quite a length of time before you're actually technically fully out from a financial perspective. I'm not sure that that's really well understood out in the marketplace by sellers.
Yeah, 100%. And I help other people in these situations, right? Because of what my role is now. But what happens a lot of times is that catches people by surprise, first of all, or the LOI has a big number on it, right? And like, oh yeah, this sounds great. And then they start negotiating on the purchase agreement, and they're like, oh, well, this is this and this is that kind of thing. And then suddenly they're not as in love anymore with the deal.
Yeah.
But the reality is all deals have some level of, runway there.
Yeah.
And that due diligence period can be very soul sucking, right? You're like, oh my God, it's, I think getting a mortgage is bad. Try selling a business, right? So it is definitely a struggle period. Having sold 4.
Yeah.
And knowing sort of how that feels along the way, I try and help people kind of set up their, what it's going to feel like, 6 months later, 2 years later, whatever. But you touch a key point, because that earnout period is very normal. And whether people have some stock tied in, if you sell in a small business and it's going to a mom and pop situation, maybe that's different. But if you're selling to, private equity or somebody like that, there's lots of little triggers there that are important to understand, right? But if you ding the bell again on that 25 or that 30% that's rolled in, it's good for everyone, right? So that's the goal, obviously, when you sell to private equity.
So walk us through, what's that emotional journey like? Because as you say, it's like one of the hardest things you've had to do is living through that place of trying to sell, and it's just not this smooth, easy ride. Somebody says, I want to buy your business, and a couple of weeks later, the money's in the bank. Like, can you walk us through what should a seller expect just from a process perspective, but also what's the emotional journey that they're going to be on through that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, you want my biggest mistake of selling a business first?
Yeah. Okay. If you could tell a story about it, that'd be great.
Sure. So I had a large roofing company in the Front Range of Colorado. I bought the business doing about $600,000 in revenue and sold it at $47 million in revenue 7 years later. Large business, 200 plus employees. And one day someone walked through the door and said, I want to buy the business. And about the same time, I had a business broker come to me and say, hey, I can get more for it, right? So I said, okay, sure. So I went with the business broker to get more. We ended up in this private equity deal. And everything was pretty good, nice big number, big earnout, right? And in the process of the earnout, I had not negotiated well on the reps and warranties clause in the business. That people bought the business, had never run a roofing company before, and had very little experience, and were sort of in over their skis pretty early on, right? They left me as chairman. 6 months later, they said, hey, go play golf. We got this thing. They fired the sales manager 2 months later, and pretty much half the sales team left with him. And so the business started not doing well, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
They're looking for ways to get out. They stopped making the payments. And basically what happened is I left $6.5 million of uncollected earnout that I never seen. Right. So that was a bummer. I
That's
was
an
really
expensive lesson.
expensive lesson.
Yeah.
Basically one clause in the contract. I've never left that clause in ever since. So expensive lesson. But what you mentioned, how does it feel? So
Yeah.
what bothered me more than the money, quite honestly, and this sounds bad to say, is the money. Money's important. It's not
Yeah.
important. But I had a girl that was my controller. When I bought the company, she was answering phones, $10 an hour kind of thing. Fired the accountant 2 weeks later. She knocked on my door and said, "Hey, I can do that job." I said, "I don't know. You don't really have experience." She said, "Try me." 7 years later, she was running all the entire finances of my company. In fact, my life. So what bothered me more than the $6.5 million is the fact that she lost her job, because I would have walked through traffic on glass for that girl. She really
Yeah.
did a lot for the business.
Right.
So a year and a half later, I ran into her and I said, "Hey, I felt bad. I built this company, and she said, 'Hey, Chad, look, here's the thing. You're a great leader. I stayed working for you in the business because of you, nothing else. I liked the job, but I stayed there because of you.' And she said, 'I've always wanted to be a cook.' When I got fired, when the business went down, I went back to culinary school, and I'm now a chef at a restaurant, living my true calling." So
Wow.
that fact and opportunity, it bothered me for a long time that
Yeah.
that person that I feel like I let down, along with plenty of others, because I didn't pick the right buyer, ultimately lost their job. But there's opportunity in everything, right? Like the leadership lesson for anybody there is there's opportunity everywhere. You just got to find it, right?
And so what is that emotional journey like? So that's an example of, one clause being one of the most expensive clauses you probably ever witnessed in your life. And I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm just curious, like, what's that emotional journey from the point at which you kind of make the decision, I think it's time to sell, to the point at which you are actually really out. Your earnout's done. You have no standing obligations to the company. You're kind of like, on to the next thing. Walk us through what that's like.
Well, I always tell people, the due diligence period is terrible. Nobody likes it.
Yeah.
It's a stressful period. They're going to ask you for things that, you don't feel they need, but that they're a buyer. They want to see it all. And then comes the day that, you're on the phone with the attorneys and you say clear to close, and they magically wire you the money with all the zeros in it. And you're very happy that day. You look at the bank account and this is a great day, right? All that hard work, everything I've done, come up to this point equals a bunch of zeros.
Yeah.
And, for the next period of time, maybe it's a couple of weeks. I think every entrepreneur is different on this. So for me, that thing lasts, 30 days, 60 days kind of thing. And then I start to feel not needed. And that's a real thing. Like entrepreneurs, you sort of get this thing where you're like, I was at one point in time important to this business. It was an integral part of my life, and I thought 100% of the time about that thing. And then all of a sudden I'm not needed anymore and almost in the way. Even if you have an earnout, the people buying your business, while they still want the information on how to do things, but it depends who buys it, but they're going to do things different than you did it.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point in time, you almost feel in the way if you're involved, because you mentioned a lot of times people, get a salary for a while, in all those cases, but that feeling of what I built is no longer mine. And now I sort of am not feel needed from it, to the feeling where I'm almost in the way of it. I don't think enough people talk about that in selling business. It is really a thing. And there's a reason that entrepreneurs go on to the next thing. They start another business, they buy something else, or, even worse, they spiral into something that, makes their life worse. Right. So, one of the businesses I sold, I was on the way. It was back when they gave you a check, right? And I was on the way home from the closing with a nice check, and talked to my wife, and I said, I think I'm going to buy a coffee shop. And she's like, "Are you crazy? You haven't even made it home yet." But that's a little bit who I am. I'm 50 years old now. I've learned a few things about how I operate. I don't sell businesses quite as fast as I once did, but right. That's a thing with entrepreneurs for sure.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think, when I talk to entrepreneurs who are interested in selling their business, they say, yeah, I'm going to sell it in 5 years.
Yeah.
But that's the end of the conversation. Like, there's no, to whom are you, like, who are you selling this to, right? Like, what's the lead up to this? What multiple do you want? What's your strategy to set up the business so it doesn't need you 5 years from now, so that the purchaser can just roll in and, and are you selling to private equity? Are you going to do your own roll up? Are you selling to your team? Are you selling to another business that's similar to yours? Like, who's the buyer?
Yeah.
And what happens if a buyer comes sooner? Like, what do you need to have ready to be in place? Are you getting somebody to advise you, like a business broker?
Yeah.
And most of the time when I ask all those questions, I just get like a glassy eyed stare back, because they're like, oh, I don't know, I'm just running it and it's profitable. And I think I can get this multiple. And that's the end of the thought process, really, on selling
Yeah.
a business. And what I love about your stories is you're telling the reality about like what
Yeah.
it actually takes and what actually happens when you decide to go down this road and what you need to be prepared for.
Yeah. And I think that if people start thinking about selling a business 3 years in advance
Yeah.
sort of set in the key things, it's like, what does the buyer want, right? Am I selling to strategic? Is it private equity? Who is it? Because those are different outcomes, right? Like, how much runway do I need to leave on this thing? Like, where is those sort of thought processes? What I do as a guide and coach now with businesses is sort of help them think through, where they're going, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's the next 10 years, we're going to grow this business to X, and then we're going to decide from there. Or we're going to sell it in 3 to 5 years. And what do we have to do to be organized? I had a mentor once tell me that if you have a desk in the office as a CEO, your business is worth 20% less. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, I own a private equity company. If I have to replace you, you're expensive. So I need the business set up so that I can run it from a team. And you as a CEO being in the office every day and being in the weeds, being there too much is going to cost me too much money. So I'm going to have to pay less for your business. And so I've always thought about it differently since then. It's like, what can I do to make my impact in the business be clean but small? It can't be 60 hours a week. 60 hours a week of impact loses value in the business, right? But yeah, one of the things I work on all the time is like this return on life theory, like helping people get that return on life.
Okay.
And that's what comes from that. That theory comes from that. It's like, if you're spending 65 hours a week in your business, you're not getting that return on life, right? So what can we do to get you that return on life?
That's really good advice, because to think about what's my replacement cost? Like, what would it cost to pay somebody to take over my job? Because if there isn't that person working in the business, then that's the purchaser has to hire that person.
100%. 100%. Yeah.
And so when you think about return on life, like I love your way of describing that, because, I think it says it's not, I think there's people that think, oh, I'm going to work really hard and then I'm going to sell my business and then I'll have all this free time. And what I love about your approach is you're like, no, you will sell your business for more money if you start having more free time while you still owe the business, like while you own it, sorry, which is a kind of an interesting thought process, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs really are tied, as you say, they're like 40, 50, 60 hours a week. And yet that's a problem when you go to sell it.
Yeah. Well, and even if you're not selling the business, right? Like, I see so many people, they're missing their kids' soccer games. They're not going on, they're not really on vacation. They go on vacation, their laptop's open, they're looking at their phone, like finding ways to actually get the business so that it runs on its own. So the leadership team is actually running the business, and the founder or the owner or whatever is getting that sort of return. Even the leadership team should think about it this way too. They should be in their individual positions, think about how they can also get that return on their life as well. This badge of working 80 hours a week is not a way to live, right? Life is finite, it's short, and one day it's over. Setting up the business to sort of for you to be in love with the business again. What actually hurts more businesses than anything is the founders falling out of love with them. And a lot of times that's because of that return on life thing. It's like 80 hours a week, my business is dragging me down. It's always stressful. Every time I get a phone call, it's stressful. Like that kind of thing. That's what's danger to small and medium-sized business. The founder falls out of love with it. And before long, it just, it's going the wrong direction. And then nobody wants to buy it.
So instead of meaningfully, deciding I'm going to replace myself so that I have strong people in all roles to manage the business, they kind of work themselves to the point. It sounds like what you're saying is they work themselves to the point where they actually resent the business that they built. So they just start backing away from it out of frustration. One of those things sounds like it's proactive and helping to create a better purchase price. And the other one sounds like it's the downfall of the existing business.
It is 100%. My goal is to always help people sort of like fall in love and recognize their business is there to support them, not the other way around. So what can we do to get you feeling that way is, all of these businesses don't operate for that reason. Then what's the point?
What I love about your theory is that I know 7 of the 11 businesses that you've built and sold are in the home services based business, but these things, these concepts that we're talking about, they really transcend to any entrepreneurial business. Like I've been in EO I joined the Entrepreneurs Organization in 2002. It's been a minute. It's been 23 years. And, I was just thinking in the back of my mind of the people in my forum, the people in my chapter, the people I've met internationally who I've watched like exits in my own forum happen.
Yeah.
And I've watched the emotional thing that happened for them. I watched the backside of it. I watched, start another business. Like I've seen all this. And it's fascinating to hear you describe it because if you're a listener and you're like, oh, okay, I get it. That's for home services business. It's not. It's literally for any entrepreneurial business that has a founder or partners that are founders that want to exit the business. These are the strategies, and I've seen them work. Like I've seen people do exactly what you're describing and be very happy with the outcome, and then I've seen people that just are so tied to their business that they just start to hate it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, same here. I've been in EO for 10 years, right? This is my 10th year, and seeing entrepreneurs around me kind of go through these struggles and also the ones that are very successful at sort of compartmentalizing that. Their businesses thrive, they tend to grow better, their relationships are better at home, all of those things is sort of what feeds me, right? And what I do now, it feeds the reason, really. Yeah. But I think in any business, it's the same thing.
It's nice that because a lot of people could have gone the path that you've gone and then said like, okay, like I've built and sold these businesses. I'm going to go golf. I'm going to play pickleball, whatever. Right. Like, and I love that you've said, you know what, I don't want people to have to go through, like, I don't want anybody else to have a $6.5 million one clause mistake. So like, I think I'm going to devote my life to going to help people who want to go and, make a decision to sell their business, but not have to go through not just the financial trials and tribulations, the process and the systems, but the emotional journey that you would have had to have been on, especially in the first couple that you did when you didn't have the experience to know what the processes were going to be, what it was going to feel like, how it was going to affect your day to day, how it impact your family and your friends. Like all of those things are things that you picked up along the way.
Yeah, I sold 3 cents and, I've not made that same mistake.
Yeah.
Funny you may bring up EO. I had an EOer, take me to lunch, I don't know, 3 years ago, I guess, because I started charging for coaching 3 years ago. And he was selling his business and he's like, here, what do you think of this contract? Can I show it to you? And I told him the story about the reps and more. I'm like, this clause right here, go back to the buyer and say you want to sunset that in 6 to 12 months and see if you can negotiate that. Because if you do, it's going to save you $1 million. And he calls me up 3 days later and he says, hey, I got them to remove that clause. I'm like, great, that $60 lunch, I just saved you $1 million, right? So it was sort of the time when I was like, I really have to start charging for this coaching thing because I do a lot for free.
Well, if you're listening right now, you probably have the same question that I have. So there's this mysterious clause that's worth somewhere between $1 million and $6.5 million. What's the damn clause? What is the clause that they try to stick in there that's so expensive?
Yeah, well, most closely held businesses are sold, on a pretty heavy purchase agreement, and almost everyone has the terms of reps and warranties, right? Like how does it apply to what you're telling the buyer? And there's lots of things in there that allow, in typical contracts, that allow them to claw back money, right?
Okay.
So the secret, in my opinion, one of the secrets is to sunset that clause. So clause goes away after a certain period of time, because what happens, people they have buyer's remorse. And at some point in time, they're going to spend time trying to figure out ways to claw this money back.
Yeah.
And so, if that happens at year 2 and the clause sunsetted at 9 months or 12 months or whatever, then it's gone. So
it's not just the particular clause, it's the whole concept of clawbacks, that you need a time-bound clawback. Because I guess, in your example for your business, where the roofing business in Colorado, where you said, hey, like, all of a sudden they're like, hey, be chairman, now go play golf. Now you've lost control of the business, but they've kept control of the clause. So now you have no impact. They fire the sales manager, they fire a bunch of salespeople, sales tank. And now you're looking at this like through no fault of your own, all of a sudden they're clawing back purchase price that really that clause should have been gone when you no longer were really influencing the business and they'd taken over. So that's the $1 million.
Okay. That's just it. I'm sure that the attorneys have, the right language to put in there, but the gist of it is
sure.
And most times those sunset periods or clawback sunset periods are not in the contract, right? So they're for the extent, and it's a simple ask, and it makes total sense, because when you think about it like that, if I go away, my hand's off the wheel. Yeah. How can I trust that you're going to do what's best for me, the seller, right? That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So that's That's the $1 million clause.
I mean, it feels fair too, right? To just when you think
Yeah.
about it, it feels fair. Like you're no longer influencing it. So why should you be harmed on the other side of it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
hope everybody that's thinking about selling their business listens to this podcast, because like the wisdom you shared so far, I think this is not common sense. This
Yeah.
is hard won knowledge that you've had through being in the trenches and selling multiple businesses.
Cost me $6.5 million.
Yeah.
But the reality is, when you negotiate these kinds of things, there's two ways to negotiate anything. It's the business way and the attorney way, right? So
Right.
the attorney way costs you a lot of money.
Yeah.
A good attorney these days costs a lot of money, but the business way is what makes sense between the buyer and seller initially. So
Yeah.
you, the seller, hey, this is a business issue. Let's talk through the business issue, and then we'll let the attorneys put the teeth in it. But that's sort of the thing too. Anytime you're selling something, don't get too far in the weeds with the attorneys until the business aspects are worked out. That's probably my other little ism there, I guess.
I had an experience. So I bought a business, and it closed. It closed a year and a half ago, I guess. No, sorry, it closed last July. So yeah, a year and a bit ago. And the seller and I was a competitor. So the seller and I spent 6 months working out all the details.
Yeah.
And then called our lawyers and said, "Hey, we've worked out this deal. Here's the details." My lawyer, of course, who I've known for he's in EO with me, so I've known him for 23 years. He's like, "What? Why are you calling me now? Like the deal's like," I'm like, "Because you're expensive," right? Like I had to hammer out all these details so that she and I were aligned on the purchase price and on the terms and all this stuff, right? And we kind of worked it all out. I said, now she's going to get her lawyer and you, and the two of you are going to make this way more complex than it needs to be. Like, no offense, but I know there's going to be a bunch of clauses that we need. And I appreciate your protecting me. And I'm mostly just joking. But it was great because they actually were able to pull the close together in about 45 days.
Oh, wow.
From when they got involved. And my lawyer said it's because the work you did in advance and the things that you both determined were not really battling back and forth. And then, on the other side, her lawyer was adding in some clauses that were to protect her, but they weren't relevant to the type of business that we're in, but they were standard type clauses you would do in a buy sell. And so we just had those removed. And then, there was the reps and warranties. Like she was like, how long should this rep and warranty last? And both of us were like, it doesn't make any sense for this to go on for a long period of time. I'm like, I feel like by the 6-month mark, we should be good, right? And she had a 1-year earnout attached to it. And so, yeah, it was the loveliest transaction. And we'd known each other for 10 years, just like not well, but we knew who each other were. We'd go for coffee every now and then. But we actually became super close friends as a result of doing the transaction and through the year of the earnout. And she is now a mentor to my 13-year-old daughter.
Wow.
So I can't believe that one of my closest friends is in my life now as a result of doing this transaction. Yeah. And then, the deal worked out great for both of us. And she continues to be a huge supporter. And now she's off figuring out what she's going to do for the next phase of her life. So
what an amazing story. Because and all probably because you didn't start adversarial. Like you're like,
not at all.
Figure out what the buy sell was. Let's leave the attorneys to the side. Let's figure out the buy sell, and then let's bring in the teeth. That's amazing. What do you mind me asking? What business that was?
So we're in leadership development, and this was a competitor in the leadership development space, but it was focused on a very particular level of leader, kind of in that manager and emerging leader range, where we didn't do a ton of business. And they had a wonderful program that was very successful and very well known in the industry. And it would take a lot of time and energy for my team to go build that out and then market it. And so it just made more sense to buy that. She also had a team in place of great facilitators and graphics designer and logistics people that they know our world. So it was great to move over. And as a result of that, she helped me launch this podcast. She helped me redo our web presence, redo our branding, like everything got overhauled as part of the transaction. And so all this wonderful stuff occurred that was attached to the deal, but wasn't actually the deal.
Oh, that's amazing. Great story. Yeah. And that's just like how you find something adjacent or similar or scratch your own itch, right? Whatever term that is.
Yeah.
That's a great entrepreneurial story. That's the success of the sideways, right?
Well, it's interesting too, because I've had friends who are in the industry who've said like, hey, PE is starting to sniff around. And I said, okay, well, we know what multiples they want to pay. And he was like, well, why don't we just do roll-ups?
Yeah.
Like, why would we why don't we just find people that think like you and I and like go do roll up ourselves and then go pitch the roll up because our EBITDA will be worth a much higher multiple because we'll hit the thresholds to get the higher multiples for EBITDA, but which we can't do individually. So there's other creative ways of skinning a cat, I guess, in terms of getting your finding a way to increase the value of your EBITDA. I think the other one that I've learned from the people that I know that are in the business brokerage space is this kind of differential between an economic buyer and a strategic buyer. And I'm curious, when you did your sales, were you always selling to an economic buyer or did you actually get a chance to sell to some strategic buyers?
No, so my last sale, we sold to a roll-up.
Okay.
So that was a pool service company. So I live in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Yeah, there are some pools there.
Yeah, exactly. 600,000 in the valley. So when I sold, we had about 2,000 pools that we seen once a week. 60, 70 employees and about $10, $11 million in revenue. Right? So that business then sold to the larger conglomerate and they're the largest pool service company in the United States. So actively use my brand in Arizona and then use different brands in Texas and Florida and things like that. But that I sort of set that business the entire time in place because I knew that play was potentially coming down the road. I also rolled up some people along the way myself, smaller players, just because of my history. I've done 7 acquisitions in my time. But that thing of like what's left, the meat on the bone or the runway is really important for that buyer. Sort of showing the vision. You can go from here to there and creating that bigger multiple on the way, right?
Yeah, you raise an interesting point. Buyers aren't buying what you've done so far.
Yeah.
They're not buying the history of your business. They're buying what they think they can do with your business for the future. They're buying the future hope of the business. They're not buying the past of what you've done.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, I use the runway analogy because I'm a pilot, right? So that makes a lot of sense to me. But you got to have room, right? If you're the biggest fish in a small town and there's nothing left, what's the point? This is entirely an EBITDA play. Yeah. But if the situation is set up and you've sort of thought through why the value is in front of you, that makes it much more exciting to the buyer and commands a higher EBITDA, quite frankly, than you probably would be worth if you didn't think about that. So the plan of what's next and what could be, and then the strategic buyer is much more positioned to do that.
Yeah. So let's differentiate between an economic buyer and a strategic buyer for listeners. So an economic buyer is somebody comes in and says, I'm going to pay you X times EBITDA because I think I can earn that back. So it's 4 times. Let's say it's 4 times EBITDA. I can earn through growth of your business. I think I can pay back this business, hopefully in 4 years, but probably in less than 4 years because I'm going to grow the business and do a bunch of things to it, rebrand it, whatever. So my goal is that I'm going to get my purchase price back. And then after that, it's all gravy because I'll be able to, I'll have paid off the loan or I've paid off my financing of buying your business. Whereas a strategic buyer is saying, okay, I'm looking at your business. I'm rolling up a bunch of businesses. I'm going to own all the pool companies in and around the Phoenix, Scottsdale area. So now in Arizona, I'm going to be the biggest. And because I've already rolled up a bunch of them, that if somebody were to buy me, they would pay me 8 times EBITDA. Yeah. And I'm buying yours for 4 times if I was an economic buyer. But because I'm a strategic buyer and you're the last piece of the puzzle that I need, I'm going to pay you 6 times EBITDA. Yeah. Because I know that the day I buy your business for 6 times and I bolt it onto mine, your business is now worth 8 times to me. So I pick up the 2 times just because now I'm the biggest player in the Phoenix, Scottsdale area in the pool business. And so that's what a strategic buyer is. And you kind of got to know which one you're selling to because you're having a different conversation.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. So you have sort of the vision, what's outside, what's out the windshield, right? So we know where that's going. The other advantage to strategic buyers from a selling perspective, their cost of operating is probably lower, right? Because they have, a much more economics of scale than a smaller person does, right? So they're willing to pay a bit more because of that, right? Because you mentioned, hey, we'll pay a little bit more on EBITDA because we know that our cost of operating your business will go down immediately, right?
Right.
So
they're winning on both sides then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I want to just shift gears for a little bit because there's this fascinating thing that's happening on social media, particularly on YouTube right now, that has to do with the marketing of home service-based businesses. And I don't know how many hours of content I've watched of somebody weed whacking, or mowing an overgrown lawn, or pressure washing somebody's walk and driveway,
Yeah.
or installing a pool, or installing a roof, or doing a home inspection of some really bad building quality. And these people are out there and they're just small mom and pop type businesses, and they go
Yeah.
to people's houses and they're like, I'll clear your driveway for free, I'll power wash it, I'll do your lawn for free. Can I video it and stick it up on YouTube? And then they put it at high speed. I've watched way too much content of something that I am not interested in any way, shape, or form, but it seems to be sweeping the home service business space as a
Yeah.
really powerful way to market your home-based business.
So what does that tell us about the human condition? I mean, this is the next level of unboxing. You know,
Yeah.
you used to watch videos of unboxing the new iPhone or whatever.
Yeah.
This is the next level. It's like watching the lawn being mowed on time lapse. So what does that mean? Are we just, so enthralled by the social media, channel that I don't know. What I see with that is that
Yeah.
people are interested. They don't want to necessarily do it themselves,
Yeah.
but it's interested in how things gets done.
Sure.
I'm the same way. I learned the trade is in carpentry, right? So like
Yeah.
watching somebody put a drawer together, cutting it, that's interesting to me because it's
Yeah.
sort of something I started in years ago. I'm not a woodworker. I don't do it at all anymore, but there's that same theory, right? So that's probably not why, but that's the thing that comes to my mind. I don't know.
My thought is there's this like weird, like I always get this great sense of satisfaction from pressure washing. My wife has it. All my friends who own pressure washers are like, that's so good, right? Like your sidewalk, your driveway looks terrible, and then you're done, and it's like, just like, look at that, right? And it's a lot of work, and your forearms are tired, and your back bugs you the next, but whatever, right? Like it's this like thing. Somehow watching other people do it is still, there's this sense of satisfaction of where it started to where it ended. And if you've got a home services business and you've got an iPhone, like here's your opportunity, I think, to consider a new channel of marketing that will probably surprise you with the number of views that you're actually going to get on YouTube for something that you're like, why would somebody watch me do my job? Like all I'm doing is the job I do every day and putting it on YouTube, and people actually want to watch this content. The answer is they really do. The views the numbers are insane of the views they get for these home services businesses.
It's crazy. It's great. And they're watching to the end too, right? Because you want to see what the driveway looks like.
You're not going to stop halfway, right? Like half a driveway or half a lawn cut, right? And then it's kind of this reveal too, because like, wow, look at how good that house looks now that it hasn't got 8 feet of lawn in front of it, right? Like it's overgrowth bamboo. Like it actually looks like a cool place to live now. And all they did was power wash the front and deal with the overgrown shrubs, right? And a lot of times they're helping out people, which is this lovely humanity piece to it, who maybe can't afford to clear their lot, who maybe have gotten a notice from their HOA or from the city saying, we're going to fine you every day until you get this cleared up. Or they're elderly and they just don't have the physical capacity to get out there and actually clear this land. And so it's like heartwarming too to watch this content, because that's who they're helping most of the time. It's lovely.
They're showing it how. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Chad, hey man, listen, I am just so grateful for you to be on this podcast. It's been great to hear your stories. I really appreciate you sharing the learnings and the lessons and the war wounds along the way, because I know anybody that is thinking about selling their business, or even if they aren't thinking about selling their business now, but might have an idea they might want to do that in the future, I think you've painted a really good roadmap for them to consider the types of things they need to start thinking about, and also the length of time in advance they need to consider it. So thank you so much for spending time here today.
Well, Mike, I really enjoyed it. I appreciate you having me on. Anytime we get to talk business and just chat about it and see what comes up is a great time for me. So I really, really appreciate it.